My name's Ethan Wallace, and I've been driving for Lyft in Phoenix, Arizona for nearly 3 years now. It started as a side hustle, but like most things in life, it slowly consumed me. Night after night, I picked up drunk college kids, tourists too sunburnt to function, and business types too wrapped up in their own worlds to say more than a grunt. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I'd always thought the worst thing I'd have to deal with was a puking frat boy or a runner skipping out on their fare. But that changed one night when I picked up Brandon, and after that ride, I started looking at every passenger like they might be my last. It was 11:57 p.m., a Thursday, the kind of night where Phoenix's heat still clung to the asphalt like a bad hangover. I was parked at a Chevron gas station off Interstate 10, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, waiting for my next ride request. Business had been slow, and I was debating calling it a night when a new ride popped up. Pickup, 6th Avenue and Jefferson. The map showed a rundown neighborhood just a few blocks away. Not the worst part of town, but not the kind of place where you'd take a nighttime stroll either. 2.1 miles to destination, 17-minute ride, easy money. I tapped accept and drove out into the night. When I pulled up to the pin's location, I saw him immediately, a lone figure standing under a flickering street lamp. He was tall and thin, dressed in an oversized hoodie and dirty jeans, his hands jammed deep into his pockets. He had the kind of twitchy, nervous energy that set off warning bells in my head. His eyes darted up and down the empty street, like he was waiting for someone, or running from them. I hesitated. Maybe I should cancel, just drive off, pretend I never saw him. But before I could decide, he turned, locked eyes with me, and took a sharp step toward the car. Too late, I rolled down my window just enough to talk. "Brandon?" He nodded once, quick and stiff. "Yeah, that's me." I unlocked the door and he slid into the back seat. As soon as he did, the smell hit me. Sweat, old cigarettes, and something else. Sour, a scent I couldn't place, but it made my stomach tighten. "Where are we headed?" I asked, keeping my tone professional. He muttered an address on the outskirts of town. About a 20-minute drive. I knew the area, a mix of half-built condos and abandoned lots. Not exactly prime real estate. I put the car in drive. The first few minutes were silent except for the low hum of the engine. Normally I didn't mind the quiet. Some passengers don't want to talk, and that's fine. But this silence wasn't normal. It was heavy. Wrong. I adjusted the rear-view mirror to glance at him. He was staring straight ahead, not at the road, not at his phone, just staring into nothing. His fingers drummed against his knee, fast and erratic. He was muttering something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words. 5 minutes in, I cleared my throat. "Long night?" His head snapped up, his wild, bloodshot eyes locking onto mine in the mirror. "Just drive." His voice was tight, sharp, like a stretched rubber band ready to snap. I gripped the wheel tighter. 10 minutes in, the unease in my gut had bloomed into full-blown alarm. My palms were slick with sweat. I was hyper-aware of every little detail, the slight tremble in his hands, the way his knee bounced like he was coming down from something, the occasional jerky glance over his shoulder. That's when he leaned forward. Too close. Close enough that I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. "Change of plans," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're taking me to El Paso?" I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. "El Paso?" I repeated. That's 5 hours away." His voice hardened. "Just drive." Then I heard it. A soft, metallic click. I glanced in the mirror and felt my stomach drop. A knife. A big one. He wasn't just holding it, he was gripping it tight like he'd done this before. Every instinct in me screamed to get out of this car, but I knew better than to panic. A moving car was still my territory. If I played this right, I might make it out. Think, Ethan, think. Then I saw it. Up ahead, a truck stop, its bright neon lights piercing the dark. A state trooper was parked near the entrance, sipping coffee outside his cruiser. I slowed the car slightly, pretending to check my gas gauge. "We're low on gas," I said, forcing my voice to stay casual. "If we're heading to El Paso, I'll need to fill up." Brandon hesitated, his eyes flicking to the dashboard. After a long moment, he nodded. "Fine, but no funny business." I pulled into the station, rolling up to the pump closest to the trooper's car. My hands trembled as I threw the car into park. "Stay here," Brandon warned. "I'm watching you." I nodded, trying not to let my fear show. I stepped out, my legs shaky. I forced myself to walk normally, casually. Then, as I passed the trooper, I locked eyes with him and I did the only thing I could think of. I tapped my fingers against my thigh, fast and urgent, Morse code for help. The trooper's face shifted from bored to alert in a split second. His hand went to his holster. Behind me, I heard the car door open. "Get back in the car," Brandon hissed. I turned, just in time to see the knife glint in the fluorescent light. The trooper drew his gun. "Drop the..." For a moment, everything froze. Then, chaos. Brandon bolted. But he didn't get far. Another officer had been waiting in the shadows. He tackled him to the pavement, the knife skidding across the asphalt. I stood there, legs shaking, watching as they cuffed him. Turns out, Brandon was an escaped convict, wanted for armed robbery. Had been on the run for weeks, and I had almost been his next victim. I still drive for Lyft, but I never let my guard down anymore. I double-check every address, I watch every passenger, because in this job, you never really know who's getting into your car. And sometimes, they're more dangerous than anything you could ever imagine. I hope you all are still with me after that last story. What happened to Ethan was terrifying, but in the end, he got out alive. Not everyone is so lucky. Sometimes, it's not the passenger who's in danger. It's the person who gets into the wrong car, the ones who never make it home. This next story is about a woman who thought she was just getting a ride after a long shift. She didn't check the driver's face. She didn't double-check the car. And because of that, she almost didn't live to tell the tale. Kelsey Adams had been working the late shift at Copper Ridge Grill, a small but busy restaurant in Denver, Colorado. She was 26 years old, fresh out of college and still figuring out what she wanted from life. For now, her only goal was to scrape together enough tips to move out of her cramped apartment. The night had been brutal. 2 large parties, a broken dishwasher, and a manager who was always on her case. By the time she clocked out at 12:45 a.m., she was beyond exhausted. The city air was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat inside the restaurant. The streets were mostly empty, the usual late-night crowd already home or stumbling their way to the next bar. She pulled out her phone and requested a ride home. It wasn't far, about a 15-minute drive to her apartment in West Denver, but walking was out of the question. Her feet ached, her head pounded, and the only thing she wanted was to shower and collapse into bed. Within seconds, she got a match. Silver sedan. Driver's name, Mark. He was 2 minutes away. When the car pulled up to the curb, she barely glanced at the screen to check the details. Silver car. Close enough. She yanked open the back door and slid in, exhaling as she finally got off her feet. "Hey," she mumbled, not even bothering to look at the driver. The car smelled stale, like cigarettes and something else. Something sour, like old sweat left to soak into the seats. There was a long pause before the driver finally responded. "Where to?" Kelsey frowned, glancing at the phone in her lap. It should be in the app West 38th and Tennyson." The driver grunted and pulled away from the curb. That was the first red flag. She had taken hundreds of rideshares before, and the drivers always confirmed the destination first. Always. But she was too tired to care, too drained to argue. She leaned her head against the window, watching the streetlights blur as they sped through the near-empty streets. A few minutes in, she noticed something off. The route on her phone didn't match the one outside the window. They had taken a wrong turn. Kelsey sat up, glancing at the screen. I think you missed the turn back there." The driver didn't answer. She felt her stomach tighten. "Hey," she tried again, her voice a little sharper this time. "You missed the turn?" Still, no response. She looked up then, really looked at the man behind the wheel. He wasn't the guy from the app. The photo had shown a clean-shaven man in his late 30s with glasses. The driver in front of her was older, maybe 50s, with gray stubble and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His shoulders were tense, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. A slow, creeping dread crawled up her spine. Her hand hovered over the door handle. "Sir, I think I should probably just get out here," she said carefully. "You can pull over right here." Click. The sound of the doors locking sent a jolt of cold terror through her chest. Her pulse spiked. She reached for the door handle, yanked it hard, but it didn't budge. Panic surged through her veins. "Let me out," she demanded, her voice rising. "I said let me out of the car." The driver finally spoke. "You'll be fine," he muttered. "Just sit tight." Her breath hitched. "No. No, no, no." The car had left the main road, now driving down a darker, more isolated street. Buildings thinned out, replaced by empty construction lots and half-finished office spaces. The kind of place where no one would hear her scream. She slammed her fists against the window. "Help!" she screamed. "Somebody help me!" The driver's jaw clenched. "Shut up!" She could feel the tears coming, the full-body panic threatening to overtake her. But she couldn't break down now. She had to think, had to act. Her eyes darted around the car, searching for anything she could use as a weapon. The only thing within reach was her phone. She grabbed it, fumbled to dial 911. The driver saw. With a snarl, he reached over and ripped the phone from her hands, throwing it into the front seat. "Bad idea," he growled. She didn't hesitate. She kicked as hard as she could, her heel connecting with the back of his seat. The impact made him swerve, the car jerking violently. It wasn't enough. She tried again. Harder. This time she kicked the window. The first impact barely made a dent. The second left a small crack. The third? The glass shattered. She didn't stop to think. She grabbed the frame, ignoring the way the jagged edges sliced into her fingers, and hauled herself through the opening. As soon as her body hit the pavement, pain exploded through her knees, but she forced herself to run. Behind her, the car screeched to a stop. She heard the driver's door slam open. A voice, low and furious. "Get back here!" She didn't look back. She ran faster, sprinting toward the only light in the distance, a small 24-hour diner with a glowing neon sign. Her lungs burned. Her heart felt like it would burst. She threw herself against the diner's glass doors, shoving them open, collapsing inside. The waiter behind the counter barely had time to react before she gasped out, "Call the police! He locked me in the car." The driver didn't follow her inside. By the time the cops arrived, the car was gone. The police ran the license plate from the app. It wasn't registered to anyone named Mark. The photo on the profile? A stolen identity. The car itself? Reported stolen 2 days earlier. The driver was never found. And Kelsey never took another rideshare again. Check the license plate, check the driver, because sometimes the car that pulls up to the curb isn't your ride at all, and if you get in without looking, you might not get out. Some people are just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Kelsey was one of them. If she had checked the app, double-checked the driver's face, maybe things would have been different. Maybe. But not everyone gets a second chance. Sometimes, there's no escaping what's waiting in the back seat. This next story is about Rachel Monroe, a woman who thought she was just going home after a night out. She thought she was safe. She wasn't. Rachel had never been the paranoid type. She was 34 years old, a paralegal working in Austin, Texas, and had spent years dealing with people who thought they could get away with anything. She knew how to read people, how to spot a liar, how to tell when someone was hiding something. But none of that mattered the night she got into the wrong car. It was a Saturday night, just after 1 a.m. The bars along 6th Street were still packed, neon lights flickering against the wet pavement, the smell of beer and street tacos thick in the air. Rachel had spent the night with a few friends, but she wasn't drunk, just tired. Too tired to drive home herself. She pulled out her phone, ordered a rideshare, and waited. A few minutes later, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The license plate matched the one on her screen. The driver's name was Joel, and the profile picture showed a clean-cut man in his 40S with a friendly smile. But when the window rolled down, the man inside wasn't smiling. Rachel hesitated. The face didn't match. The man behind the wheel was younger, maybe late 20s or early 30s, with messy dark hair and tired eyes. He was wearing a hoodie, the sleeves pulled over his knuckles, fingers gripping the wheel a little too tight. "Rachel?" he asked. She hesitated again. Something felt wrong. But the license plate was right. She glanced over her shoulder. There were people everywhere, drunk, stumbling, laughing. She could have walked back to the bar, could have called another ride, but she was so damn tired. So she got in. The car smelled like cheap air freshener, something sweet and overwhelming, like it was hiding something else. The door shut behind her with a final click. "West Campus, right?" the driver asked. She nodded, checking the app again, her gut still uneasy. The car pulled away from the curb, merging onto the main road. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. Then, the first wrong turn. Rachel blinked at her phone. The route on the app showed they were supposed to take Guadalupe Street straight up. Instead, the driver turned onto a side road, darker, quieter. She frowned. "I think you missed the turn." The driver didn't respond. She tried again, her voice sharper this time. "Hey, we were supposed to go left back there." Still nothing. She looked up, studied his face. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the wheel so hard she could see the tendons flexing. Something was very, very wrong. "Excuse me?" "You need to stay put," he said, his voice lower now. "Everything's fine." Her breath hitched. No, 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 no. She glanced at his dashboard, at his phone mount. The screen was open to a messaging app, and that's when she saw it. A text message, still visible at the top of the screen. "Got the package. Be there soon." Her blood ran cold. She was the package. Her heart pounded, adrenaline kicking in. She forced her face to stay neutral, tried to breathe, tried to think. The doors, they were locked. The windows, manual. She was trapped. Her mind raced. If she didn't act fast, she wouldn't get another chance. She took a deep breath, then leaned forward, pretending to adjust her purse on the floor. And then, she grabbed the door handle with both hands and yanked. It didn't budge. The locks. He had child safety locks on. He saw her struggling. "Stop!" he snapped, his voice sharp now, his eyes flashing in the mirror. Rachel's pulse exploded. She couldn't breathe. They were on a dark road now, nothing but warehouse buildings and empty lots around them. No streetlights, no traffic, no one to see her. She had to get out. Her hands were shaking, her mind screaming, "Think, think, think." The car slowed at a red light. This was it. Without thinking, she reached forward and clawed at his face. He yelled, jerking the wheel. Rachel didn't hesitate. She threw herself against the door, bracing her feet against the seat, and rammed her shoulder into it with everything she had. The lock popped open. She fell out, hitting the pavement hard, scraping her hands and knees. The moment she hit the ground, she ran. Behind her, she heard the screech of tires, the angry shouts, but she didn't stop. A gas station, just ahead. She sprinted, lungs burning, vision blurring, feet barely touching the pavement. She burst through the doors, gasping. The clerk, a young guy, maybe college age, looked up, eyes wide. "Help," she wheezed. "Call the police." The clerk grabbed his phone, his face pale. Rachel turned, her chest heaving, her legs shaking. Outside, the black sedan was gone. When the cops arrived, Rachel told them everything. The name on the app, the license plate, the text message. They ran the info. The account was hacked. The car was stolen. The driver was never found. Rachel never took a rideshare alone again. And now, she double-checks everything. The driver's face, the plates, the locks. Because sometimes, when you get in that car, you're not a passenger. You're the package. Rachel barely made it out alive. One wrong decision, one moment of hesitation, and she would have been another missing person, just another news report people scroll past. But she ran, she fought, and that's why she's still here. But not every driver is as lucky. Some of them don't get a chance to run. Sometimes the danger isn't behind the wheel. It's sitting right beside you. This next story is about David Torres, a part-time Uber driver in Seattle, Washington, a guy just trying to make ends meet. What he didn't know was that one late-night ride would change his life forever. David had been driving for Uber for about a year, mostly weekend nights when the fares were higher. He had a full-time job at an auto repair shop, but rent in Seattle wasn't cheap, and the extra cash kept him afloat. Was 30 years old, not the type to scare easily, not the type to overthink things. He'd seen it all. Drunks who passed out in the back seat, couples who couldn't keep their hands off each other, one guy who tried to bring a live snake into the car. Nothing surprised him anymore. Until Marcus. It was a Friday night just past 2 a.m. when the request came in. A pickup near Belltown, a neighborhood filled with bars, clubs, and the kind of people who didn't want to go home alone. The fare was a little out of the way, about a 20-minute drive, but surge pricing had kicked in and David wasn't about to turn down extra cash. He pulled up to the pin location, a dimly lit side street near a closed pawn shop. No one was around, just the faint buzz of a flickering streetlight. Then from the shadows, a man stepped forward. David's first thought? Something's off. Marcus was tall and lanky, maybe in his late 30s, dressed in a faded hoodie and jeans. His eyes twitched, darting around like he was watching for someone. Or something. His hands were jammed deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. David unlocked the door. "You Marcus?" The man nodded quickly, his movements jerky, unnatural. Then he did something most passengers never do. He slid into the front seat. David hesitated. Most people sat in the back. They liked their space. He liked his too. "You sure you don't want to sit in the back?" David asked, forcing a casual tone. Marcus shook his head. "I like the front." His voice was low, flat, almost robotic. David didn't push it. It wasn't illegal, just weird. "All right, man," David said, putting the car into drive. "Where are we heading?" Marcus mumbled an address on the outskirts of the city, somewhere near the industrial docks. David glanced at him. "That's pretty far out. You meeting someone?" Marcus didn't answer. David gripped the wheel a little tighter. The first few minutes of the ride were silent, except for the occasional sound of Marcus breathing heavily, his leg bouncing up and down. Then David noticed something. In Marcus's lap, his hands were gripping something, a coiled rope. David felt his stomach drop. You a climber?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Marcus's fingers tightened around the rope. "No." The word was sharp. Too sharp. David's hands started to sweat. The streetlights flashed over Marcus's face in quick intervals, and for the first time David noticed his pupils were blown wide. Drugs? Maybe. But there was something else. "Something wrong?" David forced a laugh. "Well, what's with the rope, man?" Marcus turned his head slowly, too slowly, and smiled. "It's for you." David's blood ran cold. He kept his face neutral. He had to stay calm. That a joke? Marcus didn't answer. David's heart started pounding. His mind raced. He was trapped in a moving car with a guy holding a rope and no way to call for help. He needed a plan fast. Up ahead, the road curved along a stretch of warehouses and storage facilities. No streetlights, no cameras, no witnesses. David swallowed hard. This guy was waiting for the perfect place to make his move. Then, Marcus shifted. His left hand darted out. Before David could react, the rope looped over his neck. A pull. A sharp, violent yank. David's breath vanished. His hands flew up, clawing at the rope, his vision blurring as Marcus tightened his grip. David's foot slammed the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, tires screeching, the speedometer shooting up past 60 mph. Marcus grunted, trying to keep his hold, but the force threw him backward. David swerved hard to the left, aiming for the only thing he could see. A telephone pole. At the last second, he let go of the wheel. Crash! The impact exploded through the car, the front end crumpling like paper. The airbags deployed, a brutal punch to David's chest, but it saved his life. Marcus? The force sent him flying forward, his head slamming into the dashboard. Everything went silent. David's vision swam. His hands shook as he gasped for breath. The rope finally loose around his neck. Then, movement. A groan. Marcus was still conscious. David's hands fumbled for the door handle, kicked it open, and stumbled out into the street. His knees hit the pavement, his lungs burned, throat raw from where the rope had been. Headlights, shouts, someone was running toward him. A passing car had stopped. A man, some random stranger, was yelling, "Are you okay?" David could barely speak, barely breathe. He turned, pointed to the car. "Oh, the cops," he rasped. He tried to... The words stuck in his throat. Marcus was trying to crawl out of the wreckage. Blood dripped from his forehead. His hands fumbled for the rope. But then, sirens. Flashing red and blue lights. 2 cops rushed forward, weapons drawn. Marcus didn't run, he just smiled. They tackled him to the ground, wrestling the rope from his hands, pinning him as he muttered to himself. Over and over. They told me to, they told me to, they told me to. David sat on the pavement, shaking. The paramedics checked his throat, told him he was lucky. So lucky. The cops told him something else. Marcus had been arrested before. A history of violent outbursts, assaults, stalking. And the worst part? His last rideshare driver never made it home. David never drove for Uber again. And now, when he gets into a car, he always checks the front seat. Because sometimes, the real danger isn't behind you. It's sitting right beside you. David survived, but survival doesn't mean the nightmares stop. He never got back behind the wheel after that night, and I can't say I blame him. A man with a rope, sitting right beside you, waiting for the moment to strike. That's the kind of thing that sticks with you. But drivers aren't the only ones at risk. Sometimes the danger isn't the passenger, it's the person in the front seat. The one who's supposed to get you home safe. This next story is about Samantha Bishop, a social media manager in Chicago, Illinois, who learned that sometimes the person behind the wheel is the one you should fear the most. Sam had been at a networking event for a new client, the kind of thing where people pretend to enjoy overpriced cocktails while secretly dreading every conversation. She wasn't a huge fan of these events, but she was trying to make connections, build her career. The night had gone well enough, but by 11:30 p.m., she was done. She just wanted to go home, kick off her heels, and binge-watch something that didn't require thinking. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, pulling her coat tighter around her. The streets were still busy, people spilling out of bars, the usual hum of Chicago at night. She pulled out her phone and ordered an Uber. Greg. Gray sedan, 3 minutes away. She barely glanced at the profile picture. She was exhausted, and at this point, rideshare apps were second nature. She just wanted to get home. When the car pulled up, she didn't hesitate. The license plate matched the one on her screen. She yanked open the back door and slid in. "Hey," she mumbled, more out of habit than anything. The driver didn't respond right away. He just pulled into traffic, merging onto Lakeshore Drive. Sam sighed, staring out the window, letting the city lights blur together. She checked her phone. Texts from her coworker, an email she didn't want to deal with. "Long night?" the driver finally asked. His voice was rough, deeper than she expected. She glanced up, catching his face in the rearview mirror. He looked older than the profile picture, his jaw covered in stubble, dark circles under his eyes. Sam's stomach tightened. Something felt off, but she ignored it. "Yeah," she said, forcing a small laugh. "Work event." Greg nodded, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "You heading home?" Sam's fingers curled around her phone. That was a weird question. The app already had her drop-off location. The drivers never asked, not unless they were making small talk. But this didn't feel like small talk. She kept her voice light. "Yep, just heading home to crash." There was a long pause. "Do you live alone?" Sam's breath hitched. No. That wasn't small talk. That was something else. Something worse." She forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. "Oh no, I live with my boyfriend." It was a lie. She lived alone, but she wasn't about to tell this stranger that. Greg didn't react at first. He just kept driving. But then he smiled. "That's good," he said. "It's dangerous for women to be alone at night." Sam's stomach dropped. She needed to get out of this car. She glanced at her phone, pulled up the app. The little blue dot, the car's location, wasn't following the normal route. She tapped the screen, heart pounding. They were supposed to take the main road back to her neighborhood, but Greg had veered off onto a side street, one with fewer lights, fewer cars. Sam's throat went dry. "Hey, I think you missed a turn." Greg didn't answer. The air in the car felt thick, suffocating. Sam's pulse skyrocketed. "Greg," she said, louder this time, "I said you missed the turn." He sighed, almost like she was annoying him. "You don't need to worry about that," he muttered. Her body locked up. No. Every survival instinct kicked in at once. Her fingers hovered over the door handle, but before she could pull it open, click, the door's locked. Sam's chest tightened. "Greg?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let me out." No response. The car turned again, heading toward an empty parking lot. Sam's breath came in short, panicked bursts. She looked around. No streetlights, no people, no way out. "Let me out!" she screamed, slamming her fists against the window. Greg finally turned his head, his expression unreadable. "Give me your phone," he said. Sam's hands shook. "What?" Greg gripped the wheel tighter. "Your phone, give it to me." Her mind raced. He's going to take it, make sure I can't call for help. She needed to stall, think. "Okay," she whispered, reaching into her bag. Her fingers brushed against her keys, and then she remembered. Her pepper spray. She grabbed it, twisted the cap open with one quick motion, and sprayed him straight in the eyes. Greg screamed. The car jerked to the side, tires skidding on the pavement. Sam didn't wait. She grabbed the door handle, pulled it with everything she had. This time, it opened. She threw herself out, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot up her knee, but she forced herself up, sprinting toward the nearest building. Behind her, Greg's car screeched to a halt. His door swung open. Sam's lungs burned as she ran. A gas station, just ahead. She barreled through the doors, nearly crashing into the counter. The clerk, the college-age guy in a hoodie, stared at her, wide-eyed. "Call the cops," she gasped. "Now!" The guy fumbled for his phone, hands shaking. The cops. Sam turned. Greg's car was gone. When the police arrived, she gave them everything. The car, the name, the plate number. But when they ran it, the name Greg wasn't attached to the account. The car was stolen. The real owner reported it missing 2 days ago. The Uber profile, a fake account. They never found him. Sam doesn't take ride shares anymore. She doesn't care if it's raining, if it's freezing, if she has to walk 10 miles home. Because next time, she might not make it out. Sam barely made it out of that car alive. The police never found Greg. No real name, no real identity. Just a stolen car, a fake profile, and a woman who trusted the wrong driver. She swore off ride shares after that. Said she'd rather walk 5 miles in the freezing cold than risk stepping into another stranger's car. And honestly, I don't blame her. But not all horror stories end with police reports and close calls. Some rides, some drivers, they never make it home at all. This last story is about Noah Carter, an Uber driver in Miami, Florida, a man who picked up a passenger one rainy night and found himself driving someone who shouldn't have been there. Noah had been driving for Uber for a few years. It wasn't his passion, but it paid the bills. 31 years old, living alone in a small apartment near Little Havana, he spent most nights ferrying tourists back to their overpriced hotels and locals too drunk to drive themselves home. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was predictable. Until that night. It was 2:14 a.m. and the storm had rolled in fast. When the storm had rolled in fast, the streets were nearly empty, the rain pounding against his windshield as he pulled up to the pin location, a rundown apartment complex, the kind with flickering lights and a chain-link fence rusting at the edges. His phone buzzed. New rider, Daniel, destination Biscayne Bay. Noah squinted through the rain. There was no one outside. He glanced at the timer on the app. Waiting time, 1:57 minutes left. Lightning flashed, illuminating the parking lot for a split second, and that's when he saw him. A man in a long, dark raincoat, hood pulled low over his face, standing just outside the reach of the streetlight. Noah rolled down the window slightly. "Daniel?" The man nodded, stepping forward without a word. Weird, but Noah had picked up stranger passengers before. He unlocked the door, and the man slid into the back seat, the scent of wet fabric and something else. Something stale filling the car. The doors locked automatically as Noah shifted the car into drive. The doors locked automatically as Noah shifted the car into drive. He glanced at the mirror, trying to get a better look. Daniel sat rigid, perfectly still, his hands hidden in the folds of his raincoat. He didn't shake off the rain, didn't pull back his hood, just sat there, silent. Noah cleared his throat. "Biscayne Bay, huh? That's kind of far for this time of night." Daniel didn't answer. The GPS estimated a 25-minute drive. The rain made it worse, the wipers barely keeping up with the sheets of water pouring down. Noah focused on the road, his nerves twitching. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Still no sound from the back seat. Noah exhaled sharply, glancing at the mirror again. "So you live out by the bay or just visiting?" Silence. A cold prickle ran down Noah's spine. Most passengers at least mumbled something. Some couldn't stop talking. But this guy? He just sat there, head slightly tilted like he was watching Noah in the mirror. Rain drummed against the roof. The car felt too quiet, too still. Noah swallowed, gripping the wheel. "All right, man, I get it, no small talk." He forced out a laugh, but it sounded wrong. Another glance at the mirror. Daniel was leaning forward now, just slightly. Noah's chest tightened. Then, the backseat light flickered on, for no reason. Noah frowned, tapping the button to turn it off. Nothing. It flickered again. The car rolled up to a red light. Noah took the chance to turn around, just for a second. The back seat was empty. Noah's stomach dropped. The door was still locked. The seatbelt was still fastened, but there was no one there. His breath hitched, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The car behind him honked. Green light. Noah's hands were shaking as he pressed the gas, his thoughts spinning. I saw him get in. I heard the door shut. He was right there. A cold, sinking dread wrapped around his chest. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on him. He checked the app. The ride was still active, the destination was still there, but the passenger, gone. His fingers clenched the wheel, knuckles white. Then, a whisper, soft, too soft. "Keep driving?" Noah's vision blurred, his entire body locking up. The voice came from the back seat. He turned the mirror and saw him. Daniel was there again, sitting, staring. Noah's throat closed up, his mouth went dry. Daniel tilted his head, his voice barely above a murmur. "You're going the wrong way." Noah slammed the brakes. The tires screeched, the car fishtailing for a moment before coming to a full stop. His chest heaved, his hands shaking violently. He turned. The back seat was empty again. The door was still locked. The seatbelt was still fastened. But the passenger seat was wet. Soaking wet. Noah's breath came in short, ragged gasps. He fumbled with his phone, trying to end the ride. No ride found. The app glitched, the screen flashing erratically. He stared, heart hammering. He checked his trip history. No record of a pickup. No ride request from Daniel. Nothing. A gust of wind shook the car, rain hammering against the windshield. Noah turned, eyes scanning the empty road. And that's when he saw it. A cross. Standing on the side of the road, just beyond the guardrail. A small, weathered wooden cross, barely visible in the rain. Noah's chest tightened. A roadside memorial. He grabbed his phone, hands trembling, Googled the location. The first result made his blood run cold. 5 years ago, a man named Daniel Hayes, killed in a hit-and-run, right here. The driver was never caught, the car was never found. Noah felt his body lock up. The rain pounded against the car. He turned slowly back to the mirror. The backseat was empty, but for the first time, Noah noticed the condensation on the glass. A single handprint pressed against the window, fading, vanishing. Noah drove home that night, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. He never spoke about it, never told anyone. But some nights, when the rain falls heavy, when the roads are empty and the city is quiet, he still checks the mirror. Because he knows, some passengers, they never really leave. If there's one thing these stories have in common, it's that danger doesn't always come with a warning. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It comes in quiet moments, in the familiar routines we trust, in the split-second decisions that can change everything. For Ethan, it was a fugitive with a knife. A man who could have ended his life if not for quick thinking and a well-timed stop at a gas station. For Kelsey, it was getting into the wrong car, a mistake that nearly cost her more than a few minutes of inconvenience. Rachel learned that sometimes you're not a passenger, you're cargo, and if she hadn't trusted her instincts, she wouldn't have been able to run. David knew the dangers of being a rideshare driver, but he never expected the man sitting next to him to try and strangle him with a rope. Sam thought she was just going home, but the man behind the wheel had other plans. And then there's Noah, who picked up a man who shouldn't have been there at all. So what's the lesson here? What's the takeaway? It's this: trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it is. If a driver doesn't match their profile, don't get in. If a passenger makes you feel uneasy, cancel the ride, double-check the license plate. Keep your phone in your hand, take note of your surroundings. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where fear starts to creep in, where something feels off, unnatural, wrong, don't second-guess yourself. Act now. Scream, run, jump out of the car, cause a scene if you have to. Your safety is worth more than politeness. Rideshares are a part of everyday life now. They're convenient, they're easy, but they're not always safe. And the truth is, you never really know who's behind the wheel. You never know who's sitting beside you. Some of us make it out. Some don't. Thank you for listening to these stories, for being part of this community, and for supporting the channel. Your safety matters. Your awareness matters. Every like, every comment, every shared experience helps remind us all to stay cautious, stay alert, and stay alive, because out there in the real world, the scariest stories, they're the ones that are true. Until next time, stay safe.